Here we go, July 25 edition of PFT PM. Closer and closer to August 12, the return of PFT Live. I see a lot of questions in a lot of different places about when PFT Live is coming back. I will mention it again, August 12th. I'm not irritated. I'm not salty. I just want to make sure everybody knows. August 12th. Until then, PFT PM. Hashtag no days off. Hashtag unless we take a day off. And I have to give NBC credit because the Olympics kind of takes over everything. Opening ceremony, by the way, tomorrow night. But they're still going to make sure that they carve out some capacity for me to continue to keep you updated on what's happening with the NFL because training camps are open. Hall of Fame game is coming. Preseason is coming. We'll be back the Monday after the first full weekend of preseason. We'll be able to share our thoughts on how some of these players looked in their preseason games to the extent they even play in the preseason games. All right. Let's get to it. First item today, with all the talk about Brandon Ayuk, 49ers receiver, wants a trade, shows up for camp, holds in. Oh, what have we here? Squeaky wheel. Trent Williams, left tackle, 3 years left on his contract, none of it's guaranteed, holding out. That's the way to deal with the 49ers. You can't be nice. See, it's a tough balance in any business. If you're too nice, you get screwed. If you're an asshole all the time, you don't last. You want to be compliant. You want to go along to get along. But at the same time, if you go too far with it, you get taken advantage of. There's a sweet spot there between being the nice guy and not finishing last. Between wanting what's yours but not pissing everyone off along the way to getting what's yours. It's not easy. But with the 49ers, we know the drill. They react when you get their attention. Is a hold-in going to get their attention, or is a holdout going to get their attention? What happened last year? Nick Bosa held out, and he held out, and he held out because the 49ers continue to drive a hard bargain. They want what they want. They ultimately gave in. Will they give in on Trent Williams? I'd say they're more likely to give on him and then on Brandon Ayuk. Because once you show up, you're stuck. At some point, it's time to get to work. At some point, the player gives in. At some point, the player's desire to go out and have a big season, to be part of a winning team, to finish the job that they thought they were going to finally complete last year, that takes over. And that's the most important thing to remember. For the player, you're in this situation maybe twice at the most, at least once if you're good enough. If you're lucky to be good enough at the NFL level, you're in this position of trying to fight for a contract. The teams do it all the time, every year. It's somebody else. It's somebody else. They know how to run this formula. They know the blueprint. They've made the playbook. And they know how to play the different personality types. So Trent Williams holds out, Brandon Ayuk holds in, and I would bet, if I were inclined to do so, that Trent Williams is going to get his deal first. Or maybe they're going to feel compelled to work them both out, because that sends a horrible message to Brandon Ayuk if Trent Williams gets a new deal. But the reality is, Ayuk showed up. He could have stayed away. Kyle Shanahan was addressing the hold-in yesterday, and he spoke of it in terms of it being an advantage to the player. It's also an advantage to the team because the team knows where the player is and the team has the player there. And if you never work out a deal, at some point, the player's got to go to work. If you hold out, you can dig in. And Shanahan made the comment about the fines that you would incur if you hold out no longer being rescindable by the team. For Ayuk, they are. For Williams, they aren't. For Ayuk, they are. Because if you're under your rookie contract, the fines can be rescinded. Bosa last year, rescindable. Williams not, and he still stayed away. So whatever they pay him, they're going to have to add in the daily fine that he's going to rack up by staying away. But you got to know when to take a stand. And again, I'm not an advocate in the long snapper holding out because they'll cut you and sign another one. You've got to be on the right side of the continuum from long snapper to core player. You got to guess right. You got to have good advice, and you got to make your move. And you got to be ready to hold firm until you get what you want. Ayuk, for whatever reason, last week, I want to be traded. This week, he shows up. And now Trent Williams doesn't. I think that makes it harder for Ayuk, but we'll see how that plays out. One thing that we know about training camp, preseason, and once we get into the regular season, and this is one of the reasons why, and I want to be careful what I say here because I don't want to gore my own ox. But so much of what we talk about in the offseason is meaningless. Don't tell anyone. Don't. And by next offseason, hopefully you'll forget what I'm saying. But so much of the discussion, the debate, the ranking this and predicting that, the ridiculous exercise when the schedule comes out in May of predicting the outcomes of games to be played in December or January. Now, we don't play that game, and we make fun of those who do. But the reality is there's a market for it because there's no football. See, there's 2 times on the calendar, football and not football. And when it's not football, we want football. So what's the closest thing to football? It's talking about football. It's thinking about football. It's wondering what happens when football comes. But the thing we don't realize, the thing that we can't account for is how teams will be shaped by injuries or lack thereof. And we got the first indication of it last night. Vikings cornerback Mekhi Blackmon, torn ACL, first day of training camp. Boom, that's it, done. Now, that isn't a dramatic blow to the Vikings. There are other players who, if they tore an ACL in training camp, it would be a much bigger deal. I'm not going to name names because then if it happens, I jinx them. I remember 1993. I was getting ready to take the bar exam in West Virginia. I'd been practicing in Pittsburgh for a couple of years. My wife and I were moving down here. I waited long enough that the big piece of the bar exam from Pennsylvania didn't carry over. So I had to take the whole damn thing again. I remember being in the hotel, getting ready to go take the bar exam. And USA Today, Terry Allen, Vikings running back, after a huge year in 1992, tore his ACL, done for the year. That was that. That happens. And we don't know who it's going to happen to. We know it's going to happen, but we don't know who it's going to happen to. We don't know how bad the injury is going to be. It changes everything. Aaron Rodgers from last year changes everything 4 snaps in. We can't account for that. And it's a combination of bad form and just kind of stupid to try to guess who's going to be injured. Unless you've got somebody who's injury prone and you have to account for that. Their playing style is conducive to more injury, so you have to at least have that on the radar screen. Or, a guy who has played 4 snaps of regular season football since January of 2023 and is going to be playing 3 games in 10 days to start the season and is 40 years old. It at least makes sense to wonder what the over-under is on how many games he's going to play in 2024. Maybe all of them. But whatever the over-under is, and I don't think they offer this. I don't know. What would the over-under be on how many games Aaron Rodgers plays this year? I don't know. I don't want to even go down that path because if he gets injured, you jinxed him. Has nothing to do with Father Time being undefeated. Has nothing to do with his injury from last year. It has nothing to do with only playing 4 snaps of actual football that counts since January of 2023. And it has nothing to do with a playing style that might have to be restricted. He was talking on Pardon My Take about how he played the year that he had the calf injury, stayed in the pocket, didn't do a lot of movement. He might want to do that now. They might want to just have him get rid of the ball. Shift into Tom Brady mode. Get the ball, get rid of it, and if nothing's there, duck and cover. Get rid of the ball and hit the ground, or take the ball with you. But don't try to extend the play. Don't set yourself up for big hits from strong players. I don't want to get too far down this path, but there's an item at PFT about an excerpt from the new book from Ian O'Connor about Aaron Rodgers and his regret not getting rid of the football faster last year when he took the hit that tore his Achilles. So, bottom line is this. Blackmon and Kendrick are the first 2 names. There will be more. And it will change everything, and it will render completely irrelevant all the stuff we talked about as we tried to figure out who's going to be good and who's not going to be good this year. There is a device that is lurking, and we've seen it in videos and photographs from training camp practices and regular season practices, and I think off-season workouts now too, the Guardian caps. And last year, the NFL was touting the benefits of wearing the Guardian caps during training camp practices. So the next obvious question is, if they're so effective, why aren't they worn during games? And as of last year, the league's position was if a player wanted to wear one during the game, he'd be told, you can't do it. Well, quietly in the offseason, it was in a video presentation the NFL was doing. Dr. Alan Sills just kind of talked about it as if it was a given, as if everybody knew that players can now wear the Guardian caps during the games if they want to. That is a huge shift. And I got to give the NFL credit here. Now, they did it in a low-key way because they understood that it was a 180 from what they said last year. And I think at the core, the idea is, man, these things don't look good. And they don't want fans to say, man, these things don't look good. The game isn't the same on TV. It's a visual. We talked about this the other day. Somebody asked a question about it. It's a visual medium. How does it look? Well, courtesy of the LA Chargers, we've now seen what is going to happen when guys wear these things in games. And I don't think it's a matter of if, it's a matter of when. They have a layer that they pull down over the top that has the helmet logo on it. And frankly, it's not, I mean, yeah, it's the big, you got to get used to it, but think of all the other stuff we've had to get used to by way of helmet design for the past 25 years. And when you go back and watch old games, I'll give you one that you can find on YouTube. Browns-Steelers 1989. It's a game that Cleveland won 51-0. Go back and watch that game. It looks like the players are wearing little kid Halloween costumes because it's the old style smooth helmet and basic face mask. So it was around 2000. Remember when the first Revolution helmet came out that had that funky face mask and it had a different shape? Like, there's so many different helmets now with holes in the structure and the logos get disrupted. It might be better to just put the Guardian cap on and slap that cover over it. And you get a nice clean look, undisturbed, undisrupted. There aren't all these undulations in the helmet. So look, we got used to that. We got used to the fact that helmets look dramatically different than they did 25 years ago. We'll get used to players wearing Guardian caps, especially when they put this wrap on the outside that the Chargers are using at training camp. And the reason they're doing it is Jim Harbaugh is a firm believer in practicing as if it's a game. I've yet to see any other team with this outer cover on the Guardian cap to make it look like the helmet. The Chargers are the only ones so far doing it because the Chargers practice like they play. Now, as they get comfortable practicing like they play, it becomes a natural extension of that concept to wear the Guardian cap when they play. And why wouldn't you want to do it? If it reduces injury at all, why wouldn't you do it? And think about it. That hard plastic shell, you get injured potentially more frequently while you're wearing it. And when you hit someone with it, it injures them. So it's good for the player who has it on, and it's good for the player who might get hit by that helmet. So let's just get used to it. The pictures I've seen don't make me say, oh, that's not going to fly. Now, of course, there's plenty of get off my lawn folks out there, especially on social media. What a shock. Who think it looks awful. Just play flag football, two-hand touch. Why do you even wear a helmet? We'll get used to this. Because again, I'll submit to you that even though it's, there's more there in the head area than we're used to seeing, it's a smooth line and it'll be a full undisturbed logo, and we'll get used to it. Because when you look at the helmets that we have gotten used to over the past 25 years, it's just part of the game. It's part of what we watch. It's part of what we enjoy, and we will get accustomed to it sooner rather than later. I mentioned Aaron Rodgers earlier. And, look, I like having content. I like having interesting things to talk about. And the higher profile the player is, the more closely we pay attention to the things that he says, the things he does or doesn't do, the things he's involved in. It's interesting to people. And it was interesting to hear Aaron Rodgers' explanation to Big Cat and my internet son, PFT commenter on Pardon My Take, about his trip to Egypt that coincided with the Jets' mandatory minicamp. Rodgers addressed it again yesterday. And, this is the bottom line, because I think the Jets handled it poorly from a PR standpoint. I think the Jets should have just excused the absence. They made it a bigger deal than it needed to be. But the bottom line is this. Aaron Rodgers deliberately chose to go to Egypt instead of going to mandatory minicamp. And he can explain it away however he wants. But in his priorities, as he decided how he was going to spend that time during the second full week of June, he decided he was going to go to Egypt instead of go to mandatory minicamp. Now, he pointed out when he met with reporters yesterday, he was there on Monday for the physical that gets done to start mandatory minicamp, but then he left. And he's explained it away in the past by saying, it's just like missing 2 days of OTA practices because the mandatory minicamp is now no different than the OTAs. And I was at all the OTAs. Well, there's no exception for missing mandatory minicamp by saying, hey, I was at all the OTAs. Can I get credit? I missed 2 days of mandatory minicamp. I was at 10 days of OTAs. Do I get credit for that? No, it doesn't work that way. Mandatory minicamp is mandatory for a reason. Everyone's supposed to be there, and he welcomes the fine. He knows what he did. He said, I'm an adult. He knows what he did. He deliberately skipped the mandatory minicamp. Now, and look, you can say, oh, that'll have no effect on the Jets this year. I'll say this. There's no way of knowing it'll have an effect on the Jets this year, and there's no way of knowing that it won't. Because by the time we get to the games that count, all of the different factors that go into whether or not the players are making the best decisions they can to deal with any given situation, pre-snap, during the play, whenever, however. You never know what the player would have picked up during those 2 days that he missed that might have helped him in that moment. Because every play is a stew of factors. And the more comfortable you are processing those factors and making a good decision, knowing who you can trust, knowing what you should do, knowing where the read is, we have no idea what Aaron Rodgers might have picked up in the 2 days that he deliberately missed. And that gets back to the thing I mentioned earlier, the Ian O'Connor book that comes out next month. Rodgers was interviewed by O'Connor for the book, and he talked about the play last year that resulted in him missing the rest of the season, 4 snaps into the ruptured Achilles tendon. He regrets not throwing the ball to Garrett Wilson, who seemed to be open. He held the ball too long. Leonard Floyd, then with the Bills, now with the 49ers. Rodgers gets to see him on the first Monday night of the season again. Floyd beat a cut block from Dwayne Brown, got to Rodgers, and there went the Achilles. Rodgers regrets not getting rid of the ball. Now, he was there last year. He was dialed in. He was present. And he still didn't make a good decision in that moment. We have no way of knowing what he would have gained from those 2 days, what his teammates would have gained from those 2 days that could somehow, some way, dotted line, carry over to the games that count. But I know this, if he'd been there, there'd be no way of saying, well, that's where the little gap is that caused someone to make the decision that they maybe wouldn't have made if they'd been locked in for the entire offseason program. And one last thing I'll say about it, well, 2 things. First, and I'm always on the lookout for BS. One of the things Rodgers said yesterday is that when he planned the trip to Egypt, he thought he was in a good range because last year the offseason program ended by June 9 or June 10. Now, maybe he's just not remembering, but that's not accurate. The offseason program for the Jets in 2023 culminated with a mandatory minicamp June 11, June 12, June 13, the same week that he left for Egypt. All he had to do was schedule the trip a week later. He picked the wrong week. And, on one hand, he basically says, I know what I did. I'm an adult. I did it. And then he says, well, last year, like he guessed wrong. No, he knew. And that's fine. That's fine. They may win the Super Bowl. That's fine. But let's just be honest with everyone about what happened. He chose Egypt over being at the mandatory minicamp. And all the talk and all the spin and all the stuff the Jets are trying to do to put out the fire doesn't matter. He knew what he was doing, and he did it. And that's one of the reasons why he's not mad about how the Jets handled it. I thought he'd be mad about the Jets calling it unexcused and not letting the world know he wasn't going to be there. And either way, both sides are at fault here for not getting the idea out there that he's going to attend the full offseason program, voluntary, but those last 2 days, mandatory minicamp, they're really OTA days. He's not going to be there. He's got a pre-existing commitment, whatever. There was a way to do it so it wasn't as jarring and surprising as when it happened. Last point. I think one of the reasons he felt entitled to do what he did, it traces back to last year when he redid his contract and gave up $35 million. I think he believes he can do whatever he wants. That they owe it to him because he handed Woody Johnson $35 million. That if he wants to go to Egypt, instead of going to mandatory minicamp, he's got the right to do it. And again, it's fine. He may be great this year. They may win the Super Bowl. But I just thought the whole situation was handled poorly. Aaron Rodgers should have been there. I don't care if it was an OTA day. It's a mandatory minicamp. It's a message to your teammates. As I said before, you're reinforcing that final message on the way out the door for 6 weeks of downtime. Phase me, as Robert Saleh calls it. You're there to make sure, along with the head coach, that the players get the message. Keep yourself in shape. Keep yourself out of trouble. And be ready when you come back to hit the ground sprinting toward every goal that we have set for us in 2024. All right, one more topic before I answer some questions. Sunday ticket update. Now, here's where we are. And I want to just elaborate on what I wrote about it earlier today, or supplement, because you may not have read what I wrote. On Wednesday, July 31, the judge presiding over the case is going to hear arguments in court on the NFL's effort to get the $4.7 billion verdict thrown out before it becomes a judgment. And when it becomes a judgment, it gets tripled automatically to $14.1 billion. The NFL is trying to drive that number down to zero. And what we've seen so far, the NFL submitted a couple of weeks ago, right before 4th of July, a 25-page brief supporting their position that the $4.7 billion verdict should be thrown out. Then, a couple of weeks after that, the plaintiffs submitted their own 25-page brief. And I know it's, what's the word, oxymoronic, to call a 25-page legal document a brief, but you're briefing the court on the issue. It isn't intended to mean that you're keeping it short. And then yesterday, the NFL had the final say in writing, and that's standard in cases like this. The party that files the motion puts in the initial paperwork, the other side responds, and then the party that filed the motion gets the last word. That'll happen in the open hearing as well. The NFL goes first. The plaintiffs respond. The NFL has the last word. When you're trying to change the status quo, you get the first word and the last word. So the NFL's brief from yesterday was a lot more brief, 12 pages. And when you read these things, it's like it's two different worlds, because one side makes a very persuasive and compelling case as to why the verdict should be thrown out, and the other side makes a very persuasive and compelling case as to why the verdict should stand. And both sides use citations to past cases. That's how it works in the law. Past cases, either in the same jurisdiction, which have far more force in theory, although sometimes they don't, sometimes they get ignored. But in theory, past cases from that same area of the country, the same state, the same federal district, the same federal circuit, have binding, in theory, precedential value on the outcome in this case. But you can draw bits and pieces from other cases all over the place, and you're just basically making a jigsaw puzzle of quotes and citations from this case, this case, this case, this case, supporting your argument that this is where the judge needs to go. And the other side does the same thing. And it's basically two mazes. And they're the same maze. One side says, here's the exit. The other side says, no, here's the exit. And what the judge has to do now is pick an exit. And what happens is, and this really, I think, causes a lot of people to be disappointed when they understand how the legal system works, because it's not nearly as formulaic and simple and straightforward, and justice is blind, and you just put the information in and you automatically get an answer that is always reliable and consistent and predictable. What happens is the judge decides, here's where I want the door to be on the way out of this maze. And then the judge will ask his or her law clerks to use those various bits and pieces of all the past cases and other relevant precedent to support the legal argument and the reasoning that gets you from the entrance to the exit of the maze. And I remember when I was a kid and they would have those mazes in the newspaper or puzzle book, wherever, I was always better at starting at the back and going back to the beginning instead of starting at the beginning and going to the end, even though there's really no difference. You're still navigating the maze and figuring out how to get the hell out. But a lot of times the judge starts at the end and works backward to justify what the judge wants to do. Now, sometimes the judge decides, I just can't get there. I can't do this in a way that will survive appeal. But that's what this comes down to. What does the judge want to do? And because the judge had some critical comments in open court without the jury present about the plaintiff's case, maybe the judge really will throw out the $4.7 billion and take his chances on appeal. What we can have happen is the judge could throw it out. The appeals court, U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, could reinstate it, and then we go to the Supreme Court. But either way, with $14.1 billion on the line, the one thing I am certain of, this thing will continue to be appealed by whoever is on the losing end, as high as it can go. And that means Ninth Circuit, and then after that, a request for reconsideration before the full Ninth Circuit, and then after that, a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court to take up the case. And if they take it up, off we go. So get used to the Sunday ticket case being around for a while. And if you're waiting for your check, don't hold your breath. Because if you get a check, unless they settle it, it's going to come after all of these legal proceedings end, 3 or 4 years out. That's when you'll get your check, if you get a check. The NFL is fighting very hard to deprive you of that check that the jury decided you should get. And even without a check, remember, the NFL deliberately overpriced Sunday ticket, taking advantage of those of you who were sufficiently zealous about watching out-of-market games that you were willing to pay a price that was so high. The idea was, let's get most of the fans to not buy it. Let's make it so expensive that most of the fans will say, I'd rather watch the out-of-market games, but I'll just watch whatever games they're giving me in my local market on CBS or Fox. All right, question time. Oh, I'm still reading that transcript too, by the way. I'm getting closer. I still have a lot more to do. I'm in the middle of Roger Goodell's testimony right now, and I have a feeling it's going to get pretty interesting. And I know that based upon some other things I've seen and just my general recollection of the limited coverage of the case, we're getting closer to the point where the judge kind of goes bonkos on the plaintiff. So that part should be interesting too. So we'll continue to have updates on the website about the transcript. Now let's see what we have by way of questions. Damn it. Questions. Damn it. Here we go. I'm getting there. Here we go. I think I used the Big Bird GIF. There it is. All right. T-Fish, how long before today's college football is a true minor league for the NFL? T-Fish, it already is. It has been. I go back 20 years when Maurice Clarett challenged the rule that wasn't really as firmly on the books as it could have been or should have been, that you've got to wait 3 years after your high school class graduates to enter the NFL draft. They called it, the lawyers representing Maurice Clarett called it a free farm system, and it is. That's the minor league for the NFL. And the difference is these players are now going to get paid. Some of them are going to get paid a lot of money, and it's going to give them more power when they enter the NFL. And it's just a matter of time before one of these players has got $20 million in the bank, says to the team that holds the first overall pick in the draft, don't take me. And if you do, I'll sit out the whole year. I don't need your money. Or, and there's still a way to do this, potentially, if you don't hire an agent and if you don't accept anything of value from the NFL, going to the scouting combine or being flown to see any of the teams, there's still an argument to be made that after you're drafted, you can go back for that remaining eligibility and then just re-enter the draft next year. All right. Jaybird 042069, got to get the handle right. Fun legal question. If my golf ball goes out of bounds and cracks a car driving by, am I liable for like a windshield? You wouldn't be liable per se. Here's who would be liable. It would be the owner and operator of the course because they didn't properly design the course to ensure that golf balls won't go soaring out of bounds and hit a car passing by and break the windshield or create some sort of chain reaction that could result in someone ultimately dying. And, you know, it's funny. I remember first year law school when we were in torts class, and I don't know what the hell that was. And I'm still not sure I do. Any and all things that people can do to other people to injure them, either negligently or intentionally or recklessly. It's kind of in between negligent and intentional. But there was a great case that helps explain this idea. and I don't want to get too nerdy here, but there's a concept known as proximate cause. Like, you do something stupid, you do something you shouldn't have done, and it causes someone else to get injured. And you have to show that what you did, if you're the plaintiff who got injured, you got to show that what the dumb person did has a sufficient connection to the injury. And, you know, if you've got a hole on a driving range that's too close to a public road, and you don't have a big enough fence, and the ball goes out and hits a car, and that car runs into another car, and that car hits a tree, and somebody gets injured, it all goes back to the owner and the operator of the course. Now, if you're deliberately aiming for the road, that's a different story altogether. That would depend upon the facts as developed during the case. So kind of a fun little, you know, I do miss practicing law, and then I think about what it was like to practice law, and I don't miss it. And I still have these stress dreams of being dropped into a trial that I don't know anything about. Or it's like, hey, the case starts tomorrow morning. And I actually had one recently. I know nobody cares about your dreams, but bear with me here. I had one recently where I made the observation during this stressful, out of nowhere, pants on inside out trial that I have these dreams all the time that I'm practicing law and I get dropped into this weird situation. And look, it's finally happened. So anyway, I know it's practicing law. 35-yard dunk. Which NFC North team wins the division the most over the next 5 years? I have no idea. I have no idea. What does Caleb Williams do? What do the Lions do? What do the Packers do? What does J.J. McCarthy do? I don't know. That's part of the fun. We have no idea. And as we said earlier, injuries are going to be a factor in who wins the division pretty much every year. Jordan Davey with the NBA announcing the new media rights deals for $77 billion yesterday. How much could the NFL be looking at in the next negotiations, especially with 18 or more games? A lot. And the question is, when is the NFL going to go back to the table? And I think this potential for $14.1 billion in liability, $440 million per team, could be creating an urgency. Is it a coincidence that they've already had talks with the union about an 18-game regular season? The current TV deals end after the 2023 season, but the league can pull the plug after 2029. Now, if the league would go to NBC, CBS, Fox, ABC, Amazon, Netflix, whoever, and say, hey, we're going to go from 17 regular season games, 19 regular season weekends to 18 games and 20 weekends, and here's all the windows, and here's all the bells and whistles, and let's go ahead and do new deals now, they might be able to conjure up some more cash. The flip side of that would be the network saying, no, we're fine with the deals we have. And the risk is, if you don't re-up on the terms the NFL wants, you may set yourself up to get left by the wayside, because they could do a deal with Netflix to take over one of the packages as of 2030. If one of the networks that currently have an NFL broadcast package decide not to re-up. So the NFL's got a lot of leverage here. When you've got the one property in media that can gather a massive audience at the same time, at a time when nothing else can draw a significant audience at the same time, you've got a hell of a lot of bargaining power. With NFL fan, could you see the Texans having a fall similar to the Jaguars last season, coming off a playoff win, not a surprise anymore, and facing a very hard first-place schedule in the AFC? The division seems more open than it's being made to be. Jacksonville could bounce back, or even Indianapolis if Anthony Richardson hits. Yeah, look. The Texans are going to say all the right things going into this season. Last year, they were a team that a lot of their opponents would view as kind of a semi-bye week. Oh, we'll just show up and beat the Texans. So the Texans benefit from the fact that no one was circling the Texans on their schedule. Also, the Texans played all of their games at 1 o'clock Eastern, except Week 18 when it was moved to Saturday night for that AFC South championship game against the Colts. Every other game, 1 o'clock Eastern. Not this year. Prime time. Schedule, very difficult. A lot of big games, a lot of tough games. They're going to have to prove themselves. So, yeah, you got a whole offseason to study C.J. Stroud. You've got an opportunity to take the Texans more seriously. I was on with Paul Allen, the voice of the Vikings, yesterday. First team he asked me about on the Vikings schedule this year. Not the Packers, not the Lions, the Texans. So you become that team that everyone circles. I have a feeling that they'll find a way to rise up and be fine because I think D'Amico Ryans is going to be a pretty good coach. He's already proven it. But it's a different dynamic this year for the Texans. And it doesn't take much to throw you off balance. And even last year, they took it all the way to week 18 before they won the division. So, yeah, the Colts could be in it. The Titans could be in it. The Jaguars, by all appearances, they were in great shape until they fell apart down the stretch. So nothing is given to anyone. You go back to the valley of 0 and 0, as Dennis Green used to call it, and you got to dig your way out 1 week at a time. And there's a lot of factors that are going to influence the outcome between now and when the dust settles after week 18. Manuel Villa, when did you know that you, quote unquote, arrived in the NFL media landscape? And that's a great question. I don't think much about the past. I'd rather focus on the future. Part of me doesn't like to think about how this all came to be because I think I'd freak out and be like, what the hell am I? Who in the hell thought that they should listen to me? And plenty of people still understand that they shouldn't. But within the first year or two after I launched PFT, when I started to hear from teams, people with teams, general managers, team presidents, when I got a letter faxed to me, remember the old fax machines, and it's coming out 1 page at a time, and it was from a team president that was unhappy with something I'd written, and I don't know if they were threatening to sue me or what, but it's kind of like, holy shit, people read this stuff. And then I remember the time where there was one team in particular, I was being critical of their quarterback, and they threatened to send NFL security. I don't know, to my house or my law office or what. It was like, really? But then it's like, really? Damn. And I've known this to be true for years. A very high percentage, whether they admit it or not, a very high percentage of owners, especially owners, all the owners read PFT. It's one of the reasons the league office hates me, because the owners see something on PFT that calls into question something the league office did, and then of all the other shit that the league office has to deal with, an owner calls up and starts asking questions about my story. Very high percentage of the owners. Very high percentage of the front office employees. Very high percentage of the coaches. Increasing percentage of players, because we have developed over time a very strong pro player slant, which balances out the fact that everyone is anti-player. They're rooting for the laundry. Media, fans, shut up, quit complaining, be happy you have a job, all of that bullshit that we hear all the time. So somebody's got to take the other side of that and say, hey, these are human beings who come out of this game damaged, and they have a limited window to earn their money. Let them get what they can while they can for the sacrifices and the risks they're assuming. Agents, 100% of the agents read PFT, and those who don't aren't very good agents. So if we could get the saturation with fans that we have with everyone in the business and media, we'd blow out the servers every day. I mean, we're doing fine as it is. And people have been predicting the downfall of PFT for a very long time. We're not going anywhere. One of the reasons we're not going anywhere is everyone in the business pays attention to what we have to say and how we cover the sport. And it's basically the wire service now for anyone that wants to know what's happening in the NFL. And again, if we could ever find a way to get there with the fans, the numbers would be from pretty damn great to holy shit. How do we keep the lights on because all the power is being sucked into the servers to distribute all of the content? Anyway, that's a long, convoluted way of saying, back when I got threatened by a team president for something I wrote, that was when I knew, and that was probably 2002, 2003. That was when I knew that I'm kind of onto something here. And here we are more than 20 years later. Okay, let's see. Manuel Villa, given their inability to get stadium funding for their current NFL team, is it realistic to assume Chicago can get a second franchise given there will be smaller markets that will gladly throw free money for a new stadium? Look, I think Chicago is a candidate for a second team. And if they're going to have to pay for their own stadium, look at Stan Kroenke. What helps you pay for it? Having 20 games instead of 10 games played at that stadium. So the NFL is going to have to want to expand, or somebody would want to have to move to Chicago. But I think as we look at the possibility of 34, 36, 38, as many as 40 teams, Chicago getting a second team, I think has to at least be on the radar screen. All right, let's see what else. Jeremy Dodd, what do you think of the Hard Knocks offseason series? I think it can be better than training camp, and I'm not looking forward to the AFC North in-season cluster later in the year. I think offseason Hard Knocks is great for us as media and fans. I think it's horrible for the Giants. I think it's horrible for whoever is going to be doing it in the future. I think that it peels back the curtain on stuff that we shouldn't see, which makes it awesome that we get to see it. And I don't know why the Giants agreed to do it. And I don't know why the Giants didn't insist on more aggressive editing. Look at what Saquon Barkley had to say yesterday. When he talked to Joe Shane for the last time, when it was clear that they were going to let him test the market, whatever the case may be, Saquon didn't even know it was being recorded. So there's all sorts of problems that this can cause. And think about when the episodes are coming out. In July, during those last few weeks of, I got nothing else to worry about, let me enjoy my life before the craziness starts again. And the Giants have had to deal with potential blowback and questions. And, this person may be upset, that person may be upset, had harsh things to say about the offensive line. They're making it clear that they were looking to replace Daniel Jones. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. But collectively, the NFL thinks it's worth it. And I think that the reception to offseason Hard Knocks has been such that 32 teams are going to say, let's keep doing it. And every year there's going to be a team saying, why are we the ones that have to do this? I'd be volunteering for preseason Hard Knocks. Give me right now. I'll take it now. I don't want to be given the assignment of offseason Hard Knocks. No way, no how. Because even if you get it right, you end up spending a lot of your time scrutinizing all the footage to make sure it's an entertaining show that doesn't give away too many of your secrets. And the one guy who gets it is Brian Daboll. He's kept the lowest profile in all of this. He knows how this thing can go haywire. And he has, I think, deliberately stayed away when they were harvesting this footage. But look at that. If he was deliberately trying to stay away from certain conversations or downplay his role in things, it's a distraction from what you're trying to do in the offseason. So it's not worth it. But I love it. Calvin, isn't it strange to have Kyle Shanahan actually acknowledge Brandon Ayuk's hold-in? I thought that was a negative thing, and they would always say some injuries keeping the player from practicing. Well, Kyle Shanahan tried to do that yesterday. Now, he acknowledged it because he was asked about it. But he said, well, he's not practicing because he has a sore calf or whatever. No, he's not practicing because he wants a new contract. And that has become a thing. Ever since they made the fines non-waivable for a lot of players and more expensive for all players, the hold-in has developed into a middle ground between holding out and just showing up and practicing. And it is better for the team because the guy's there. And if it doesn't result in a contract, at some point the guy's got to show up and play, like Roquan Smith a couple of years ago with the Bears. So I think the teams like it. The player avoids the fine. I think the best move for the player is deprive the team of your services, and every player has the right to do it under the CBA. They're not violating a contract. They're complying with the CBA labor contract and exercising those rights to stay away from practice in order to get what they want. JB, how long until Guardian caps are mandatory league-wide? I think that once we see teams with players who wear them during games, and once we start seeing the injury data from the players who wear them during games, I think we're going to, as we get used to seeing it, as we get used to the reality that it's clunky, it's bulky, but at the end of the day, helmet's a helmet, it wouldn't surprise me if it first becomes mandatory for linemen. And then, it starts with the people closest to the ball and spreads out. We see pictures all the time now of receivers at training camp with them on. So it doesn't make the game more dangerous. it only potentially makes the game safer. And if they're going to try to justify 18 games or more, these guardian caps become, I think, an obvious requirement at some point for NFL equipment. All right, I should probably wrap this up. I'm just looking to see if there is anything else to hit today. Scrolling. Here's a question about Sunday Ticket. I'm always looking for some Sunday Ticket questions just to prove that although plenty of people like nobody cares about this, people care. This is from Katav, the Gray Wolf. Maybe this is something obvious that I should know, but why doesn't the viewership for Sunday Ticket count for Fox's and CBS's ratings? Especially now with Sunday Ticket on YouTube, I would imagine they could track that easily. Here's what happens. For CBS and Fox, which has all of the various affiliates from coast to coast, they take the local viewership from all the affiliates and they roll it up to the national number. Sunday Ticket is a completely different beast. Sunday Ticket has all of the Fox and CBS feeds captured in a different platform and carved out from the ratings for those local market games. And, you know, you've got local ads that don't make it through to the Sunday Ticket package. Think about that. Local affiliates selling ads for NFL games. It's going to be the most desirable advertising space in any market in the country. Those local ads disappear when you do Sunday Ticket. And that's just the way it is. The bottom line is the ratings get sucked away from CBS and Fox. And that's why the NFL deliberately overpriced it. That's why it became an antitrust violation, because it was the 32 teams working together to place the package in a spot where it'd be difficult to get. You got to get the DirecTV dish. You got to pay for the DirecTV service. You got to pay for Sunday Ticket on top of that at a price so high that most people are going to say, I'm fine with watching whatever games they choose to give me in my local market. So that's why the problem is there. And even if the NFL ultimately wins, bottom line, they took advantage of those of us who were sufficiently interested in watching out-of-market games to overprice it. So not many of us would do it. That does it for today. Thanks as always for some of your time. We'll be back on, is it Thursday? It is Thursday. We'll be back on Friday to go 5 for 5 as we get closer and closer to the return of PFT Live. Once again, August 12th. We'll be back. Until then, thanks for checking out PFT PM. Be sure to visit profootballtalk.com like all owners and coaches and GMs and plenty of players and all the agents and all the media do. We'll see you there. For now, tomorrow, we'll see you back here. Have a great day. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.